Yo, it's Guido coming at you with a tank review. I have finished up the Tier 8 Saladin. Technically the FV601 Saladin, the Tier 8 British medium wheeled tank. Medium. I'm going to talk about that a little bit when we get into the comparison tool and check out some of the tanks that are sort of like it, and then one that's almost exactly like it, but completely different. All right, Saladin, it's a Tier 8. Here it is in the garage. It is a wheeled tank. It is handled a bit differently than the wheeled tanks are handled that we know of, i.e. the French wheeled tanks. The big key here being those are lights. I guess there's several keys. They're lights. Their wheels turn more than these do. Talk about that in just a minute. They're lights. And they're magic because they have magic physics that this tank doesn't appear to have, from what I can tell. The French tanks can turn up their own arseholes, and these things can't turn to get out of the way of the Titanic. It's a fascinating decision, the way these have been mech'd and how they have been put in the game. But that being said, let's take a look at the Saladin itself and quit complaining about things I can do nothing about. Here she is, 6 wheels. Looks like a little wheeled tank. As I said, it is a medium tank. The way I had it set up, I am running the T2 because I don't have enough stuff to turn it into a Tier 3 mobility improvement system, which I quite like. And in fact, if you look at a recent video that was put out there, and I want to say it was Dez, but if it's somebody else, I am sorry if it was somebody else. I think it might have been, but the point of the video was it doesn't really matter what kind of turbo thing you put on your tank. They're all more or less the same. Yes, there is a slight advantage to the improved, i.e. the Bond turbo over this thing and over a regular turbo. But you've got the regular turbo, you got the regular turbo in a turbo slot, you got the experimental, you've got the bounty, you've got the improved, you get the picture. As long as you're adding a little bit of mobility, +4 to +5 or so in there, +3, then you're in the same ballpark. And this thing also gives a few more bonuses, as you can see, extra pluses in there. Hull traverse, this is really important with this tank. Turret traverse, fairly important. Some help to dispersion. A little bit of extra engine power in there, and some top speed both in forward and reverse, +4, +3. It gets better if I'm able to turn this thing into a Tier 3 or T3 version of this. I have optics and I have a CVS. All right. I only ran one setup. In fact, I think I'm still going through. In fact, I haven't done any, I believe, field mods because I just finished the grind and I moved on to the 9. Once I finish the grind, then we can do some field mods and things like that in there. And once I open up a second equipment setup, I would probably build myself some kind of combat setup where if I get into Himmel's Dorf or something like that, where I'm not trying to be more of a vision medium tank or a bad light tank, I suppose, then I will have 2 setups. But I played, I want to say 50 battles in this thing with basically this setup, more of a scouting setup. So a mobile sniper early to mid game, swinging into more of a light tank. If there was no light tanks going on, I would try to do as much of that as I could earlier. And once the light tanks die, or you get to mid to late game, then you can become pretty effective being a poor man's light tank as a medium. Now, lots of mediums can do that in the game, but this one's at least got some speed to make it have some capability, or a little more capability perhaps, than some of the other tanks, some of the other mediums. If we look at the crew right here, the setup's a little wonky, unfortunately. However, the good news is it's the same setup through all of the Brit wheeled tanks, so you won't have to move guys around as far as their quals go. We've got a commander with radio operator, and I think that's on here somewhere. I thought it was on there. Well, radio operator and a loader. We've got a gunner that's also the loader. This is a bit painful when you start talking about intuition because you've got to have both guys training it if you want the full effect. Then we've got a driver that's just a driver in there. I did run food. I did not run any directives, and I ran about 15 APCR rounds. I guess I did early on maybe do about 5 to 10 battles with the stock gun. Let's take a look at that real quickly. It's also a 200, actually there's 2 guns to go through. I forgot about that. The stock gun's a 76 millimeter with the pew pew from the Tier 7, which is extremely painful. The first gun you get is this 150 average damage. Let's just jump back here and make sure I think you can actually get this on the Tier 7. Yes. All right. So the 75 millimeter M6 is this gun here. So you might want to think about that, unlocking this gun while you have the FSV Scheme A, so that the gun is already ready when you get to the Saladin. Otherwise, you're going to be dragging yourself through two kind of crummy guns for a tier 8. It's much easier to grind out the tier 7 because the gun before it is useful at least. At least this 76 is not too bad as compared to this one. So I would recommend you unlock that, provided you don't have enough free experience to do it. Anyway, there's 2 radios. This was interesting to me that Wargaming seemed to get away from all the extra component stuff that they had in the past. But this line, for some reason, starts to have a few more things going on, like the extra radio, only one engine, only one set of wheels, but this whole process to get to the GSOR of this gun, which is also over here, a new turret, and then a new gun. That's something that we saw a lot of in the previous iterations of the game, 5, 6, 7 years ago, and have seen much less of recently, but it seems to have made another appearance here with the British tanks. And so we get to the 90 millimeter, which is 250, 221 pin, 225 with gold, 255 with gold. Bit of an anemic gun, especially at tier 8, and especially when you start talking about a medium, right? Maybe a light tank, you look at that and go, okay, that's probably decent for a light tank, but this is a medium. Yeah, you get the picture. As with my reviews of the tanks before it, it's a bit schizophrenic. I don't think this tank really knows what it wants to be, and I think the decision matrix or the decision tree or the reason they made the decisions from Wargaming, I'd love to have been a fly on the wall to figure that one out, because why these aren't light tanks, I don't know. I know the game is kind of covered up in light tanks, and I suppose another line of wheeled tanks that are light tanks may not have been high on their list, but I find it fascinating these became medium tanks. And as I've noted before, when Matchmaker sets up the tanks, there are a few tanks where specific tanks can come into account, i.e. the EBRs. They have some special matchmaking rules, but this is a sniper medium, and there's a lot of sniper mediums, so you could be basically across from, and that's not how it does it necessarily. It's not this guy versus this guy and that kind of thing, but it tries to build similar teams. So you're taking up a medium slot with a medium that can't do very well some of the medium things that the rest of the mediums in the tier 8 slots can do. I find it kind of interesting, and that's going to bleed over into how I compare this here in just a second, because I think it's kind of interesting. Let's take a look then at my stats. How did I do with this thing? I did get 50 battles. I think I unlocked a couple modules. As I recall, I've run out of free experience on this grind because I used it, I think, for one of the sales that happened fairly recently. But I got 50 battles in here. We got 838 on the average XP. That's much lower than I would like, and only a class 2. People are doing pretty well in this tank. We'll get to the stats, global stats, in just a minute, but people are actually doing some good work in the old Caesar Saladin right here. As I said, 54%. I've survived 40, which is pretty good. Hits are decent, so the accuracy is nice. 1.33 and 1.7, a little low for me. I think this is absolutely hilarious right here. I don't know if I've ever taken a tank to 50 battles and not somehow managed to randomly bounce a couple things just enough to get 0.01. But this is apparently at least 0.00, or I guess, yeah, at least 0.005 or 4 for it to round down to an RU efficiency of 0. So I don't know if I've bounced a single shot, to be quite honest. It's hard to tell. I don't think that information is in there. I don't see it, but wow. 830 experience I did mention. I wish that was much closer to 1,000. That speaks a bit to only being 54%. Low sample size with 50 battles, as always, right there. 1,235 is a little bit low for my tier 8 mediums. And 447 is lower than I would have expected on my assistance, because I really did try to do assist with this thing. So I clearly failed in that regard. It's on par with a lot of my mediums, but a little less than some, and it's nowhere near my light tanks at tier 8. I only managed a 2,700 damage battle with 5 kills. That's kind of why I've only got a Class 2, because I didn't have any big breakout games. But I did have a consistent number of solid games with this tank, and I always felt like, despite all those shortcomings and my whining about it not being a light tank, or maybe not necessarily whining that it's not a light tank, but kind of wondering why it's not a light tank and trying to figure out where it fits in the game. We talked about it a lot with the 6, the 7, I guess the 5 as well. Once I started realizing and playing it a little more to its strengths in terms of a mobile sniper tank, not my playstyle, but once I started doing that a little bit more, I felt like I had much more say in the battle. I was able to stay to the medium, to the late part of the battle, and while I wasn't racking up massive numbers, because frankly that's hard to do when you only got a 250 alpha and you have a tank that can't really get in the fight immediately because it just doesn't have the armor to be survivable. It's hard to rack up huge numbers with this thing unless you're getting some great sniping action out there. But I did feel like I was starting to get better at figuring it out and being more effective and being a part of the win. I was running a 60% for quite a long time. In the last 10 or so battles was a bit rough, and we've dropped ourselves down to 54%. But again, notice 50 battles, that's a low sample size. So that is how I've done. Question is, how has everybody else done? Or one of the questions is how has everybody else done? So if we go over here, we're taking a look at all of the tier 8 tanks here on tanks.g or tomato.gg. Now, these are all premiums, and that's just the way it is at tier 8. The premiums just absolutely own the tech tree tanks. To some extent, a bit of that is because people have to grind stock tech tree tanks, but also there's just, especially the top 10 are just plainly better by miles and miles and miles than any of the tech tree tanks. However, let's just slide on down here and look at the second best, at least currently, tech tree tank is the Saladin in win rate. If we go to DPG, slide on down here, we'll notice that here it is. It is the second best, again, tech tree tank in DPG. And if we slide down to frags, it actually overcomes the UDES by just a little bit. If we take a look at assist, it's number 1 and climbs up a bit and actually makes an appearance in the top, almost top 10, maybe top 15 in terms of assist. So very interesting. Early yet, those could change. There's standard caveat of when tanks first come out, more experienced players, better players tend to play them early, might inflate the stats just a little bit. People don't know how to play against it, although at the same time, that should also be an advantage. There you go. It's doing pretty well. It's going to be interesting to see where this lands in the next year, to be honest with you. I don't think it's going to drop too much. That surprised me. If right when this line came out, if you told me that it would be in this position, I would probably not have believed you, and my estimation would have been much further down. But so far, it's doing quite well. Now, I'm beating all of those numbers with mine, but not by much. Not by much. All right, let's take a look at a comparison then. And I mentioned earlier that we would have an interesting comparison. We have the Saladin, we have the G-Sor. The G-Sor, as you might recall, is the Tier 8 Premium version, or the Tier 8 Premium. It's not a version of the Saladin, but the Tier 8 Premium at Tier 8. Tier 8 Premium Medium from the British line. It was the first tank that came out from the line. As they are wont to do, they put the premiums out first, and then they follow that up with the actual line. So oftentimes we get, unfortunately, a premium that is just head and shoulders above the tech tree. The G-Sor is doing a bit better. Let me just refer to the win rate thing here and see where the G-Sor lives. Yep, it's still basically top 10 win rate, although it's near the bottom of the 10. And it has, yeah, it's still doing well in DPG. Interesting. So we've had discussions about that as well, and I've had people tell me how it's just not a good tank, which I disagreed with. And then I brought up the statistics on how it's doing, and so far it really hasn't dropped much lower than it was. It's not near the top, but anywho, there you have it, the G-Sor. The Barask. Why the Barask? Well, it's kind of the same playstyle, even though it's not a wheel tank, to be quite honest. It's that sneaky sniper guy early, can swing into some of the scout roles. Mid to late game is extremely effective. Of course, the Barask has a couple other things going for it. It does hit much harder, and it has 2 shells that it can close people out with. Trying to close people out with the Saladin late game is much harder. Yes, you have the speed, you can get in there, but you're going plink for 250, or if you low roll 200 or something silly like that. Whereas the Brosk is dropping 700 on people. Of course, it has to hit and pen both shots, but let's just say it gets one, it gets 360. So the near deads, the amount of hit points a near dead can have that the Brosk can shut down is much more than the Saladin. So the Brosk definitely has a little bit more power in that situation right here. So 250. 221 pen, which is the best of the standard pens in all of these. And I did throw the links on there just for giggles. Why did I put the links there? Because it's basically the same kind of vehicle, right? These two vehicles were developed and they fill the same role. One happens to be called a medium in this game. One happens to be called a light. And there's some very significant gameplay advantages and disadvantages that come along with that. Rate of fire is pretty good with the Saladin. Its gun loading is fastest of all of these. The Brosk being an autoloader, of course. If we slide down to depression, that's pretty good. They're all at -8 minus the Brosk. It's only at -6. The Dispersion is tied for best with the G-Sword. If we take a look at the guns between the Saladin and the G-Sword, remember the G-Sword is dropping to 360. All right, deep breaths, drop the G-Sword is dropping 360. 0.32 dispersion. Aiming time is just about best in class. The Lynx is a bit better than the Saladin right there. And we get down to the nuts and bolts here. We got the Saladin with the highest DPM, doing it at 250 a shot. There you have it. Hit points at 1200. This is one of those then balancing things. You get over to the Lynx and it drops a bunch of hit points off because it's a light tank. So hit points is one of those things that Wargaming will move around more or less at will depending on the class of the tank in order to balance. As opposed to armor and some things where they'll try to keep that more historically accurate. Obviously there are no historically accurate hit points kind of things. Hull armor is low. It's worse than the G-Sword at 32. It's not as bad as the Burr or the, I'm sorry, it's not as bad as the Lynx. The Lynx being a light tank. I mean, this is really bad. Even the worst HE shells just about in the game are going to pen this thing, to include a lot of tier 6 HE shells down there. Smaller caliber HE shells. The Saladin at least has some-ish protection against some of the lower caliber ones, but in the side or back, really no. Not much, just frontally for the turret and the hull. This gets us to mobility, where this thing theoretically does 60, but unfortunately, when you go to the specific power, 23.86, you will notice that that's pretty low. Down there with the G-Sword. Both of these tanks have basically the same performance in terms of mobility, and they both take forever to accelerate. If we go all the way to the right there, you'll notice that the Lynx with 34.71 and a 58 km/h top speed will get up and go much faster, i.e. it will reach its top speed much faster. Also, hills don't crush it as much as the Saladin. The G-Sword and the Saladin get crushed on hills, and to some extent the Brosk does as well. In fact, the Brosk with tracks is slightly faster than the Saladin and the G-Sword. This gets us to traverse speed and its mobility. The Saladin is fast in a straight line. Its ability to turn is much like the Queen Mary or the Titanic. It don't turn so good. It's only got a 31.29 traverse, and the G-Sword is exactly the same on these numbers right here. Interestingly, it does show that the wheels will turn 4 degrees. I don't know if you can actually see that in game. That's not very much. Whereas the Lynx is steered by turning the wheels, and the G-Sword and the Saladin are turned by differential braking or speeds, or however exactly they do it with the wheels, i.e. one side goes faster than the other, or one slows down and that causes it to turn. It also, like it says right there, has a 4-degree capability with the wheels, which is going to give it a little bit more maneuverability and slow speed situations. It's weird, guys. It's odd. It is. Whereas the Lynx here, because its wheels turn and it has some magic physics attached to it, as I said earlier, and I didn't even put the EBR, FL, never mind that thing. These things can turn up their own rear end. If you let go of the accelerator, you take your finger off W and turn it hard, it will just turn right around. Won't tip, won't fall over. Unless it's very uneven terrain, it won't roll. It'll just turn up its own arse. This thing, if you try to turn it and let go of accelerator, it'll just slowly try to get away from the iceberg, hit it, and sink. All right, that's basically what this thing does. And last but not least, it gets us to the camo issue. And the difference between light tanks and medium tanks is obviously the light tanks carry their camo while they move. This thing is not bad though. It's not quite on the Burr level of 19, but it is 16, making it better than the G-Sword. By the way, the G-Sword 1010 is quite a bit larger than the Saladin. That's why it loses out on its camo. But its moving values lower down to 12, which is not terrible. But as you can see, the Lynx keeps both of its great values the whole way, and the Burr's got a little bit more. Back to another balancing situation. View range. 380 on the Saladin, 380 on the G-Sword, 390 on the Bourrasque. I don't know. And then a whole 310 on the Lynx. So the idea here was they really, Wargaming really put the hammer down on the wheeled light tanks on the French line on their view range. The theory being that because they were so fast and could get in and out, they didn't want them to have a 380 view range and be able to just light everything and never be hit. It's probably a pretty good idea because if they had regular view range, it would be absolutely insane. However, in practice, it hasn't really hurt their spotting capabilities. If you take a look at the numbers with these things, their assist is right up there, if not better, than the rest of the light tanks. There's other things involved. They have wheels, they don't slow down, blah, blah, blah. Well, they do slow down, but not very much if they get hit. Saladin theoretically does the same thing, but it will slow down much more than, say, an EBR will. Essentially on the fact that it's only got 3 wheels. The Lynx actually has that problem against the EBR because the EBR has 4 wheels, this thing has 6. So, sorry, it's got 8 wheels. The EBR's got 8 wheels, this thing has 6. Which means that if you take a hit on the wheel with the less number of wheels, then you have a higher percentage of slowdown, essentially, at the end of the day there. It is an advantage. It is a good thing. It is an advantage over a Bourrasque. If a Bourrasque gets its track broken, it stops dead, right? Doesn't go anywhere until you fix it. At least the Saladin and the G-Sword will keep on moving, but they don't generally keep on moving as fast as the Lynx does. That's the bottom line of all that, blah-de-blah. All right. So what do we... There we go. All right. So there you go on the comparison. What do we have? Like I said, it's interesting and weird at the same time. You have a medium tank. Takes up a medium tank slot. Can't do a lot of the medium tank things because a medium tank is the flexible tank generally. There are some light skinned ones that play like this. I could have put the KPZ-07 up there as well, probably a similar play style. But it's not able to do any hold down turret games. You have to be very careful with it early. You can run it as a scout, but a Lynx is better as a scout kind of idea. So very strange, very, very interesting line of tanks. And all that being said, it's doing fine, right? It's doing fine. So it does have some capabilities and strengths, and we'll show you that when we get into the gameplay right there, where I'm going to show you basically in this particular game, I'm going to run it more careful and be a sniper kind of guy early, move around once some of the enemy team starts to die and it opens up the map a little bit, move into other positions, try to get some spotting, try to use the speed to get into situations where I can then leverage its maneuverability, but be really careful about getting into close knife fights where you actually have to turn the hull and move around objects and things because it can become very difficult to win those fights. The hull traverse is just very limiting in those situations. Very limiting. All right, let's take a look at some gameplay with this thing. All right, guys, gameplay for the Saladin. This was going to be a standalone video, but I think I'm going to use it actually for the review of the Saladin, which is why I have a different shirt on probably. This will have been done before I actually just told you I was taking you to the replay. But anyway, we're top tier to 2-tier battle here on Himmelstepsdorf, and I called this one Sniper Cleanup. And I think, you know, this has been a journey for me with this tank, figuring out, or really the whole line, figuring out how to play this thing and how to, what advice to give you guys. And some of you may have already figured some of this out or disagree, but let me know down in the comments. One comment I thought was really interesting last week or a week or two ago was, hey, how come you haven't mentioned that it kind of plays like a Bourrasque playstyle? And I thought about that for a minute. At first, initially I went, bah, it's nothing like a Bourrasque. And I thought, you know, it kind of is a bit like a Bourrasque in playstyle. Now, obviously, it doesn't have an auto reloader. And when you start talking close-in maneuvering, the Baraska is much more nimble. It's also got tracks. But honestly, the way this thing is set up, it's not a lot like the French EBR tanks with wheels, because it's just not as fast and nimble. And it doesn't have the physics that I'm aware of. Now, if it does have the physics of keeping the wheels on the ground, the ridiculousness of the EBRs, which is completely different than any of the physics for the rest of the bloody game, it's hard to tell because they don't have that nimbleness and they don't turn as sharp. And so right now I'm doing the sniper thing. So as far as the Barras thing goes, I think it's a fair comparison in general, because I don't want to rush forward and be seen. I want to take early positions due to my speed. I think I just ate a shot because somebody shot behind me right there. I was trying to figure out what happened. Yeah, so the E25 got seen and I ate that guy's shot. I've also got a dead gunner that I did not notice until a little while longer. A little while longer? A little while later. So get that guy tracked. A little bit of assist there, some 10 assist. So go to forward positions, kind of like you might with a Barras. Maybe a little bit of spotting. We talked about that with the tier 6 and 7, that sometimes it can be the poor man's scout, like many mediums can. But this thing's set up with maximum view range, and you'll have already seen all the stats and things, how I've got this thing set up. I can't believe how long I ran this without my gunner. What a dope. You know what? I thought I pressed the button, but clearly I did not. Now, what does it not do like the Barras does? Well, it doesn't have that shutdown capability of the boom boom auto loader, right? The two-shot that makes that mid to late game capability of the Barras absolutely superior. But it does have mobility, and I will call that mobility straight line mobility. Now, the problem is the traverse is so bad. I think if Wargaming were to buff these a little bit, and honestly, at first I thought they absolutely needed it. Maybe they don't, because they're doing really well. We'll see what happens in 6 months to a year, as always. But right now, the stats are pretty good. And I don't really expect them to fall much below about midpoint. And these are tech tree tanks, so they're just not going to be as good based on historical things. I just missed right there. But the straight line speed, once you get up to speed, is pretty good now. So you can see the kind of, I mean, that was full turn, right? I couldn't even really make that corner. And that's an interesting thing to talk about with tanks that have bad hull traverse, is when I came around that corner, I wanted to be in the bottom of this ravine, right? Because of the way spotting works in the game. I want to be as low as possible to keep my spotting point out from being spotted by guys out here as much as possible. I don't want to go surfing up along the edge of this and highlight myself across this, but you saw I came pretty high, right? And that's just one of those things that you're going to run into when you're traverse and you have crap traverse and you have a fast tank. And when you're trying to make tight corners in the game, because the maps are oftentimes quite constricted, especially when you start talking about in cities and some of the tighter channelized maps. This one happens to be fairly open. But then it becomes hard to make corners. And in cities, this thing can be extremely painful. If you're at speed on Himmelsdorf, and you're trying to get around a corner, it sucks. Because you're going to have to slow down and actually stop for a second and shift a bit. Now, the gun is decently accurate. I've enjoyed it pretty well. You can see I'm making a few long-range shots there. We got 1,200 damage and 385. So we're kind of playing Sniper Boy. It's got okay camo, so you can play a little bit of the camo game here. I've more or less stayed unspotted most of the game. And now it's more or less cleanup. So you get to that mid to late game, any tank gets better, any player gets better. It's good to always get to the mid to late game. Now you have votes, you have a choice, you have a say in how the game goes. But if you've got a tank that can take advantage of getting around fast with some decent camo and a decent sniper gun, now you got something to cook with, right? Look at this. I'm just trying to... Yeah. That was a full turn, fellas. I wanted to not run into that tank and get stopped, and I almost could not do it. Now, like I've said, I don't know if that buff should be made, to be honest. It's possible that it makes this thing a little bit OP if it's able to be nimble. And really, when you look at it, and I've mentioned it before, these probably should have been light tanks. We already have a bunch of wheeled light tanks. They kind of look like light tanks. They're light. They don't have a lot of armor. I mean, honestly, they're lightiums, I guess. Is that how would you put it? Mediites? Scoutiums? Maybe Scoutium is the way to go. I don't know. So we're gonna find this guy. Notice I got through all that without being spotted. Now I'll be spotted now because I shot, but that was actually pretty good. I got in there, saw guys, got them lit. No problem. Oh, I finally got lit right there. It looks like maybe I didn't get lit on that first shot. Look at that. Look, gathering up some spotting because we get in close. It's kind of scout stuff. Kind of scout stuff. I'm going to take a shot from this 103 right here. Kill him. That gets me seen. The 103 sees me. I'm like, is he really looking at me? He sure as heck is. But a shot. Oh, bummer. A little bit of assist. We'll take that. He fixes it, unfortunately. And then dies. Very good. And we'll finish up with the Ferdinand here. So, like I said, get out there. Don't lose hit points early. Be very careful about going to the early medium spots. And what I mean by that are early medium spots where there might be a medium brawl, where mediums might go hold down and fight each other on important early positions. You can't do that with this. There's no real hold down with this fella. Turret can't take it. So okay on the depression, roughly, but it just doesn't do well in that. So those positions, maybe as sniping into those positions or supporting a bunch of mediums just as an extra gun, as long as you stay out of line of fire, you can do that. But you're not the tip of the spear in those positions. So you're kind of relegated more to airsats scouting, right, around the edges, and some sniper stuff. And the gun's pretty good for that. So another way people have said to play these things are to play them more like mobile TDs. I think it's situational. I mean, it is a medium. You are in a medium slot on your team. You probably need to do as much as you can some of these medium things, especially mid to late game, when your speed and mobility is going to help you. So early on, some sniper stuff like I did, reposition to the middle, make sure nothing bad's going on there, see if we can find a couple guys to shoot. And then pushing in, and once we started to get map control, bring that medium vision, because this guy can see all the way out. I've got max view range on this thing, plus a little bit. Then bring that nice vision and okay camo in there, and start picking off the snipers and the guys hanging out in the back. So I think that's the general way to do this, and it really is kind of a Lydium tank out there. Maybe a TDM, maybe a Lydium, I don't know. Try to track that guy. It was a bad shot. I wasn't really into the track. So we'll just back out. I thought he might turn, but he didn't want to. But let's come back in with the reload. This time get into the track. There we go. Got him tracked. The Hellcat rams for extra damage. That is approved by Guido. That maneuver is Guido approved 100%. Well done. The GW Panther got a laugh at it. That's always good. Well played, fair phase. Guido approved maneuver. 3 kills. 2,265 damage, 1,398 assist, and there's some gameplay for the Saladin. I don't know if there'll be another one. Right now, this is the only one I've got. We also just got a patch for the Waffentrager event, and I don't know when I'm actually going to finish this tank because I have about 20,000 experience. So, a little time travel going on here, fellas, but if there is another replay, enjoy. Otherwise, we're going to wrap it up. I don't know. It'll be a surprise to me, too. All right, there you go. I did not, in fact, have another battle. I thought I did, but I didn't, and I finished this a little sooner than I thought. Took me about 50 battles, as I said. The tanks are growing on me. I'm starting to enjoy them a bit more. They are not brain-dead tanks. You really have to be on top of your game to get a lot out of these tanks. You got to be very careful early and mid-game. Watch out for the Arty, because it will spank you hard, as in any light tank out there or any lightly armored tank. And if you can, like I've said, if you can get yourself to that mid to late game, you're going to be much more effective than rushing out and trying to take frontal positions because herder, I have speed. Just watch out for that. And also, don't let the speed get you into tight situations where your hold traverse limits your ability to get the hell out of there. Early on, I think I mentioned on the tier 6 or 7, one of those replays, I thought I was going to do a strafing run, and the turret traverse is enough to kind of do that. But the problem is the turn is so slow that I just went way wide around the building and was just completely obliterated because everybody had shot at me. I could not get in and out in a turn fast enough. So You can get in quickly, but getting out's another trick. All right, guys, that's all I've got on the Caesar Saladin. Let me know what you think down below. Are you grinding this line? Do you enjoy the line at all? Are there any of them that you like? To be honest, I'm starting to enjoy the 9 because it feels a bit more mobile than this one. But we'll get to that review a little bit later when I finish it up. You guys have a fantastic day. We will see you.